Dr. Bart Rademacher, and this is Prescription for Your Transformation. Real people, real conversations, and real success. And I'm always so delighted when I discover these geniuses that are willing to share their wealth of insights with me, because then I get to share that with you. But more importantly, I get to connect you with them, because that's what this is all about. And so looking for those individuals who've got this beautiful perspective and how we can transform our own personal life. And basically, it's a process of what's called mastering change. And no better individual can I think of Stephen Twohig, and to join me today in discussing that part is what's the medicine that we really need to tap into. And so as we look at today, with COVID happening and all sorts of other crazy things happening, we're kind of going outside of ourselves to get the medicine so that we can be healthy. But as he eloquently puts it, that medicine is inside of us. Stephen, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I love your podcast, Bart.
Thanks so much. So tell me, you said something that was really resonates very well with me, because I'm from that person where I believe that what's inside of us, that potential within us, particularly in a physiological sense, is where the healing can happen. And so I was delighted when you shared that with me, that the medicine's not outside, but the medicine is inside of us. So share with me, your experience with that and how you actually help people.
Yeah, thanks. I spent the last 2 decades studying transformation and change, and be it the 10,000 hours interviewing business leaders from around the world, and the thousands of hours of studying under Tony. And I started taking in NLP and cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnotherapy and shadow work. And I started taking all these hero's journey. And what I started to see was all these modalities were really affecting one thing. There was one thing that aligned, and it was really how the mind operates. It was how we as people operate in a certain frequency. And I could remember very distinctly, every Saturday I sit down about 10:30. This is when I was in Colorado. I would go to this special place I'd sit down, I grab my pen and I grab my piece of paper and I would write. And I built this groove in my mind where at 10:30 on Saturdays where inspiration comes. And that in itself was powerful, that lesson. But I remember sitting, I was writing, and I'm like, okay, am I going to talk about NLP? I think it was going on a podcast or something. What am I going to talk about? I was working through what I was trying, and all of a sudden I saw, I sat back and I thought, well, how does consciousness work? How does the mind work? And I thought, and Tony, my mentor, Tony, his voice popped in my head and he said, identity is the most powerful force in the human condition.
Right.
Okay, well, what does identity drive? What does it drive? I don't know. And I'm like, what is this? I don't know. And I started to notice that there's a chatter that runs in my head. Well, what is that? Well, that's a narrative. That's a plot. Wow. And all of a sudden I could feel my hair on my skin started standing up, right? Well, identity drives narrative drives story, because it's all story.
Right.
And story drives the beliefs that we make our beliefs based on the story. And that belief is what drives the emotional charge that pushes us forward. And so it's almost like I saw for a brief period of time consciousness coming through my body and then connecting and the wheel turning. And all of a sudden I realized all these modalities, people talk about with the medicine, and I've done the Peruvian drinks and the 4-day sits, right, and all this stuff. And I started to see how it was all doing one thing, which was aligning my mind in a very specific way. And it's all, we can go out and do all kinds of stuff, but if I don't go in and I don't work the medicine that's going on, what's going on in here, nothing changes. And so all those modalities are important. You got to have the technologies, but if you don't understand how to run the computer, and if I don't know how to work this here keyboard, then there's no way that I'm ever going to get this computer to do what I need it to do. And so, it all comes down to one thing. Am I going to work the medicine? Am I going to do the work? Am I going to integrate what it is that I know to be true for me?
So how do you go about doing that? Because I think this is brilliant. And what comes to my mind, and I just want to check in with you if you agree with this, is that we have to start asking the right questions, because you can be doing all these things, but the way that I look at it, I guess, is that all of us are searching, for divine happiness, however you want to define that. And some people argue with me, what is divine happiness? Well, but the point is that whatever makes us unhappy is what we have to resolve. And so it's a matter of just asking the right question.
Yeah, well, so I was in Kansas City. I was doing a workshop. This is back when we could travel and we could do those intimate workshops,
Right.
right? And before the workshop, I bring some VIPs in, and we would sit down. And this gentleman came in 5 minutes late. His name was John, and John was just gray. He was a 70-year-old man, and his skin was he was shut down. He couldn't make eye contact, real low voice, And from an NLP standpoint, we start to, well, what could this be? So I watched him come in just very, very defeated. And I said, does anybody want to do work? John stepped up, sat down, and he said, well, John was suffering from terminal cancer, like terminal cancer. And he was getting ready to go through this major process, this major procedure. And they just run some tests on it. The test came back terrible. And he took the call literally right as he was pulling up into the facility. And so I said, well, what do you want to happen here, John? Wrong question, right? He said, I just want to go to sleep and have it all be over. Well, John, that's not how the world works. And you know that better than me. I mean, you've got way more wisdom, and he had way more, 7-year-old man, And he said, well, I just want to, I don't want my wife to suffer. I want to go through this with some dignity. And so I was reading him. I'm like, okay, so the first question I ask is, who are you? Like, who is this person? What is the chatter in your head? And who is this person that's driving? And he said, well, I'm a victim. You're a victim. So when we have the victim identity, if you think the narrative is driven by that identity, that it's like a radio station. He had the radio dial tuned into victim. So all of the songs that he was listening to were about how I'm a victim. I can't do
Right.
this. Right. And so I said, well, John, let me ask you a question. And I said, has there ever been a time when you went through a dangerous thing and it excited you, that it led you? You knew you had to do this, other people would die. And I mean, for me, it still brings. He's looking down, and he looks up like this, and all of a sudden his skin went from gray to just this bright pink hue, and like all of a sudden, like 20 years just melted off. And he said, yeah. He said, when I was a youth, I used to ride the rapids, and they used to call me River Rat. And all of a sudden, I saw this different identity come online, right? And this identity of River Rat had to go through these rapids and make sure that these people were safe, and he was leaning into danger, but he'd lost that identity of who he truly wanted to be.
Right.
And I think the first question we all have to ask ourselves is, who am I, or who could I be? And to build off of that, because if we don't build off of the identity of who we are, we're going to constantly find ourselves tripping up over ourselves, right? And then also we also have to find out that shadow identity, that part of us that we hide, repress, and deny. We also have to find that shadow identity. I call mine Slick. Slick, 3 o'clock in the morning, Slick's like, bills, 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 problems, 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 and locks me in that box. And when we can label our identities and we can pull them forward when we want them, I can pull Slick out and say, look, dude, like, you're not driving the bus today. I'm driving the bus today. And this is who I really am. And I don't have to act out of those negative narratives, those negative stories, those negative emotions, right? I can rewrite who I want to be. I now have the pen. I am now the author to my story.
Yeah, I love that, because what you're basically saying too is that you're approaching life proactively in response to what's happening in your environment versus just doing an unconscious reaction. So, as we sort of tap into, okay, who am I choosing to be in this moment, right? As I think Viktor Frankl says, I mean, the last freedom of man is to be able to choose your attitude in any given situation. But the thing is that I think we get so caught up in social standards, obligations, norms, requirements, whatever that is, that we get hypnotized by that. So how do you support people in that process? And I know we're going to talk about systems in another, session, by the way, not today, but, what's a process that helps people remember to actually do that?
I got a couple. I do a 2-hour hero's journey, which is what I call it, mastering change. We're studying all these different modalities for change. That's a quick change. So the first thing I want to do is I want to lock them into what identity. I want to go in, dig in, and find the identity that is their superpower, their genius, because we all have this genius inside of us. But
Right.
most people load identity. We think identity is they're just one Steve. But what we're finding over and over and over again is these multiple identities. We have sacred identities like being a mother, being a father, being a husband, these are sacred identities. Like a mother, I think, is probably the most sacred identity that I can think of, because a mother will move heaven and earth for their
Right.
kids, right?
Right.
It's a physical, right? That's a sacred identity. So first we've got to load these sacred identities and find, what is it oh man, I am powerful. And now all of a sudden, like you said, all those cultural beliefs, all that stuff is packaged inside of our identity. It's like a file. Now all of a sudden everything shifts like instantaneously, because now I'm constantly listening for like if I'm doing coaching, I'm listening for what are the identities that I'm hearing, what are the stories, what are the patterns that I'm hearing, so I can go back and see what's really going on, like you said, because we go unconscious. Most people load their identities based on the situation. They wake up in the morning. How many times do they do this, right? They wake up in the morning, and the first thing they do is they go,
Yeah.
what problems do I have to deal with today? And then
Right.
they roll out of bed and they can't figure out why they're not happy, and they can't
Right.
well, you're loading whatever identity somebody else wants.
Right.
You're living out of a story that's not your own. And how could I ever be happy if I'm have you ever read a book that you didn't like to read?
Right.
Right? It's like, oh, this book sucks, right? And that's what most people are doing. Most people have,
Right.
have decided to read a story that's not their own, but they haven't consciously chosen, and that's the problem. So, be it the hero's journey workshop, the mental cleanse work, the tight groups that I do, the one-on-one coaching, or whether I'm doing something, totally unique, like speaking in front of, I've been around the world now, speaking in front of, a bunch of people. The first thing I want to do when I'm checking in with somebody is going, okay, who are you and who could you be? Who's in there?
Right. And basically, the best version of ourselves. And I think, oftentimes we don't recognize that, there's 10 times, perhaps 20 times more within us. And we have access to that. We just have to find a way to do that with people like yourself. And I love how what your archetype is, and you're like the guide. You're not a coach, but you're a guide. You guide people in the direction that they can go into to actually transform their lives.
Exactly. I mean, I got some amazing brothers and sisters that are coaches. They do phenomenal work, but I'm a guide, and I've studied the terrain, I've studied the forest, and I'm going to do is say, well, there's six basic archetypes, and you're living out of here, and where do you want to be, and allow them to direct their
Right.
journey, but doing it in a way that gives them the tools that they need to acquire that, right, to get what they want. Because we all, like you said, we all have, and I want to disagree with you a little bit here, Brad. I don't think that it's 10, 20 times. I think we have infinite potential,
Hmm.
but the problem is that one of the things that I've learned, I call it the law of diminishing awareness. So, if you imagine in front of you, you have three doors. I have door number one, door number two, door number three, and these are the
Right.
choices that I have to make. Well, when I make a choice, because my mind is locked in time, which is a construct, right? It's a mental
Right.
construct.
Right.
But say I choose door number two. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this decision.
Right.
Well, because I stepped through door number two, part of me automatically assumes if this, then that. Door number one and door number three are not necessarily as good of it. I can't necessarily, I've already chosen not to do that. We see it all the time when people make decisions to not integrate their stuff, not to do the work,
Right.
and all of a sudden it just slips away, right? And so as we get older, what happens is our perception of reality, our construct of what's possible, gets thinner and thinner based on decisions. And that's why you see, I believe this is why you see old people that for them it's very black and white. It's either this or that, because they've only,
Right.
in their mind, they can only perceive a very
Right.
limited number of choices. And so what we have to do is we have to stretch, we call it your threshold of control, right? We have to
Right.
stretch our perception. You go to a gym, and I go to the gym, and I go to the gym for a different reason. I go to prime myself, but you go in and you have that transcendental rep where it's like, okay, you know, not
Right.
and
Right.
I'm not, and as you can see, I'm not like I don't do this to be a Hulk, right? But you go in at ninth one, I can't do this, I can't do
Yeah.
this, and you go no, and you make it happen anyways,
Yeah.
because I've at some level broken through a veil. There's some piece of my life out here that will be adjusted because now my perception goes, oh, well, if you didn't think that was possible, maybe this is why Tony's, I used to watch Tony in the firewalk, and you'd see all these people go through the firewalk, and all of a sudden they have these big breakthroughs, and they have all these new awarenesses, and
Right.
I didn't even know I could do that.
Right.
Yeah, it's because they've stretched what they believe is possible, right?
I totally agree with you. I mean, for me, I look at it from the perspective of I feel I'm just getting started. And every day I'm just getting started. And so for me, there's just a sea of possibility. And and quite frankly, I love being there. There's quite a bit of uncertainty too. But I also think of, well, you know what, there is so much possible. So I love our conversations, and I know we're going to do this little mini series. So how do people actually do find you, Stephen?
Well, there's a couple different ways. My main site is masteringchange.com. You can go there and you can connect with me. You can find me, schedule a session, something like that, if you want to connect with me and learn a little bit more of what I do. My business stuff is strategy.zone, which is a new, instead of .com, it's .zone. And then I also have a site that will be up here by the end of the day called welcometothejourney.com, which we'll talk about that a little bit farther down the road. And
Well,
Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and all that other fun, right? All that other fun stuff.
one thing I have to make a shout out, and it was interesting in my personal life. I mean, I trained for 17 years in the medical industry, and I grew up in 5 different countries, speak 4 languages, and at the end of all that, I thought I knew everything, and realized by quite a big shock that I didn't when I entered the world of personal development. And my point is, we all deserve a guide like Stephen to help us understand what that terrain is and what are the actual things that we can do, because no one taught us that growing up. And fortunately, there are more people today that can do that, but it's still not an institution, if you will, of transformational personal development. And if we just focused on our children and ourselves to embark on this deep work, as you like to put it, we have to do the work. If we want to optimize ourselves, we have to dig deep. We have to, find the medicine within. And so once again, I encourage people to find Stephen, Mastering Change, and strategyzone.com, I guess. And so many other programs that you have. You've got masterminds and all that kind of stuff. So Stephen, I want to thank you for that today. And I'm Dr. Bart Rademacher, Prescription for Your Transformation, Real People, Real Conversations, Real Success. And one of my other taglines, Stephen, is tap into your authentic genius so that you can live the life that you desire. So spot on.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Dr. Rademacher's Prescription for Your Transformation. Continue the path towards discovering your own authentic genius by tuning in next time for more real conversations with real people.